Hey everybody, welcome to the Always So podcast, a production of Will Witt's Faith and Marriage. This is Dr. Mario Sacasa, and I'm grateful that you're here joining us for what is another amazing episode. Well, today I welcome Travis Thompson, licensed marriage and family therapist and author of the book To Those Left Behind, helping partners and families understand and heal from addiction. In this episode, we explored the complicated nature of being married to an addict. If you've been following this show for the last couple episodes, you've seen that we've talked about addiction from pornography, how to talk to our kids about pornography, and now we're going to be diving about spouses being married to addicts. And while today's episode isn't specifically about pornography addiction, we go broader into chemical addictions and other behavioral addictions. The principles we're laying out in this episode are certainly going to apply regardless of where you find yourself. So we talk about this complicated nature of what it means to be married to an addict. We examine addiction through the lens of attachment. We offer steps of recovery for addicts and their spouses. Discuss codependency. What does that mean? We hear this word tossed around often. We get into that. We talk about the strengths and limitations of AA and al-anon groups and how to set boundaries when married to an addict. Well, if you find this show helpful, please share with one other person who you think would benefit from it. We want to continue to get this show into the hands of people who need it. So let's get into this conversation with Travis Thompson. Travis Thompson, welcome to the Always So podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm actually awake this morning, so God's definitely in it.
Well, God bless you, man. Without coffee or with coffee, just pure grace. How do you roll in the morning?
You know, God gives many wonderful blessings. Coffee is definitely one of them, especially espressos.
I had to, my listeners know this because I've talked about it before. I had COVID a couple years ago. And then I got the long COVID kind of syndrome afterwards. And one of the strange kind of consequences is that I developed this incredible caffeine sensitivity. And so I had to like wean myself off of caffeine for months. And it was rough. And so even now I still miss it, you know, like I'm kind of like maybe a decaf espresso. That's about as much as I can do before like my head starts hurting and all this crazy stuff. So this might lead into our conversation today, talking about addictions. You know, like
Well, that's your cross to bear. I'm so glad Jesus didn't give me that
one. But it's funny. So I went from like a cup of coffee, and then I had to go from a cup of coffee to like a half calf cup, and then it was half calf like every other day, and then like a decaf cup, and then it was like decaf every other day, and then slowly weaning off completely, you know, from everything. And then when it was all kind of off the table, my body went through this, like, it was like chocolate, just give me chocolate, you know, like it was like,
Yep.
So I just started becoming a chocoholic for a couple of weeks. I'm like, where is this coming from? I'm like, oh, my body's craving caffeine still and it's trying to get it any way that it possibly can. And so even in chocolate, I was like, this is an addiction. I mean, like, I don't know what to say. Like, this is what this is. I'm like somebody addicted to cocaine, like trying to like find it on like dollar bills or something. I mean, like, it's like, like collecting dollar bills for something, you know, like this is what I felt like. So, I mean, not to make light of anybody, obviously, who struggles with a real substance addiction there. But I know this is the area of your expertise. You've written a beautiful book on the topic, To Those Left Behind, that's focusing specifically on spouses and family members of those who struggle with addicts. And so grateful for your time, grateful for us to be able to have this conversation this morning. And so really, I guess the place where I would like to start is simply there. Like, how do we define addiction? You know, there's a lot of different working models out there, a lot of different definitions that we can kind of operate out of. But how do we define it? What's your best kind of way to be able to conceptualize in addiction?
So let me start with the negative, and then I'll go with the positive.
I
don't believe it's a disease. And I talk in the book of how I break that down and what it looks like, and you know, constructing a rational argument around it. I find it to be more of a relational attachment issue, where we find comfort and security when we should be finding it in other areas. And granted, this book is purely secular. There's not a biblical reference. That's actually the one I'm writing right now. I've got over 100 at this point. But this one is specifically just how those relationships affect us, particularly when it comes to intimacy and vulnerability. Addicts do not experience that. They don't in addiction, and they don't in relationships, because it's enforced through this mitigating factor, intensity. Intensity is what drives relationships, and intensity isn't vulnerable, because if I say something like, I'm going to kill myself, you don't get the option to say no, theoretically, right? And so addiction is this 100% short relationship that's always going to be there for you. And addicts end up developing this huge problem with silence as well. They can't sit in that mode of having nothing going on and nothing impairing them, because all of that shame comes back. So in short, it is that marriage to intensity, the lack of vulnerability, and the absolute terror of silence.
So, okay, break that down a little bit more. So you're saying the marriage to intensity, the lack of vulnerability, and then just the difficulty of being alone. And so there's always this ready-made way to distract yourself, that dopamine hit. Any sort of discomfort can be easily dealt with by turning to the substance. And in my area is I don't work as much with chemical addictions as much as you do, but I do work with a number of sex addicts, men who are struggling with pornography, masturbation, or even other sexual practices. And so I know that there's a parallel. We could talk about that here in a little bit. But one of the things that I often tell my guys when I'm working with them is that when you have to think of your relationship with pornography as that, but it's almost like it's like an abusive relationship. It's
Absolutely.
it's the bad girlfriend, that like you just can't get rid of, but you still call her. She's on speed dial,
and it really is.
And you know better, but you still make the phone call. Like you still invite her over.
Interestingly enough, and I mentioned this in the book at the beginning, that all of the things that I talk about apply to any kind of addiction.
Yeah.
It's just that chemical addictions kill people faster.
Right.
And they're more intense, and they have legal ramifications, right? But that's exactly what it is. If I could interject my favorite alcoholic joke, and I would love if you would laugh with me. It helps my ego.
No pressure, no pressure.
So we'll just say that we have a wife who's an alcoholic, right? And the relationship between her and her husband's obviously strained. They have a lack of vulnerability. And whenever they fight and they cannot resolve their issues, she goes and leaves and goes and hangs out with Jack Daniels.
I gotcha.
Right. And so it is this vulnerability issue, and it's this relationship issue. And I actually talk about addiction being an emotional affair in that way. Right. Instead of dealing with my stuff, I go and do this. We take, let's just say it's cocaine, right?
Right.
Let's switch that with an X on Facebook and see if it applies, right? We fight, I can't handle my issues, so I start messaging my ex. I don't feel like I'm worthy or good enough, so I FaceTime my ex. All we're doing is changing one detail about where you're running, and all of a sudden, this whole understanding opens up about it being an emotional affair. So I would say they connect whether substances are there or not.
Yeah. And so with you open the book with this, and in terms of different models, why do you like the attachment relationship model over some of the other models that are used to explain addictions?
I think the other models have been overstudied, and we've fleshed them out as far as they can actually go. I would say personally, the attachment model fits with, one, my style of therapy. Two, I think it's an unexplored frontier in the realm of addiction. But more importantly, I think it's biblically minded, because we talk about having a relationship with God. We talk about having this engagement, and some people will fall into like a legalism trap where it's, I got to do the good thing and then God will like me. And if we learn a healthy relationship with God, then we can create those dynamics with our significant other and have a reason to distance from addiction. But we see the relationship styles, we see the attachment styles all the way up until addiction. there's some pretty consistent factors. And I think that's one of the things that sold me is I started seeing very consistent dynamics in the clients and patients that I had in the past. And so I started just kind of following that trail to the point where I said, okay, let's just imagine the 4-year-old with an inconsistent parent household grew up, and let's take that through the emotional maturity lens, how we develop from parents into friends into significant other. And then let's just take it one step further and say those had quote unquote failed, and we just input a substance, and all of a sudden all the pieces started fitting together. And you could see how someone became in a relationship with substances rather than just, well, my dopamine wasn't good enough today.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. I mean, I'm an attachment guy myself. I used attachment theory to help guide my study for my dissertation, and so you're preaching to the choir, here. And so I guess the question here is, when it comes to then that this relationship has been fostered with the substance, I think that, so the focus of today's episode, I want to really kind of speak about to spouses. I mean, that can be, you talked about already being an emotional affair. And so that can be hard for a spouse of an addict to hear that. And so what could be helpful using this paradigm for the spouse of an addict to be able to understand kind of what their relationship is that they're having with their substance or their behavior?
I have never had a spouse disagree or feel sad after I explain the emotional affair. Every single one I've explained it to said, there it is. That's what I've been trying to explain or figure out. So quite honestly, most of them aren't sad. They feel seen in that regard, right? But you can't go argue against alcohol. Right? You can go, if you want to get scrappy, you can go fight an ex, right? How are you going to go fight alcohol? And so most people, every single person I've talked to, when I explain this, they're thrilled because they have ground to stand on. They have something to explain to their spouse other than, I just don't like it and it doesn't feel good.
Yeah. And so what does that process of recovery look like, both for the addict, but then also for the spouse who may be struggling to, not just maybe struggling, but even understands the conceptualization? What does that process for their relationship look like under that paradigm?
I dip into some infidelity literature for this, where I start to talk about the affected partner or the grieved partner. And we start to take that paradigm where we go from, okay, so this infidelity had been going on for a long time. The affected partner or the grieved partner gets a say in how things work to help balance the relationship out again. Right. And if it is an emotional affair, I don't see any reason why we can't dip into infidelity literature. Right. Of course, we have to keep recovery in mind, just because people go to meetings and that can be helpful. Obviously, you got to keep track of like bodily and neurological issues too. Right. So you can't completely forego that. But if you start to see it that way, right. One, you give the partner a space to breathe and to have a say, but you also start to understand the dynamic relationally and seeing how emotions have to be connected to the partner instead of being offloaded into a substance.
So it's challenging then the person with the addiction to start engaging with their emotions, and not just for their own sake, but for their spouse's sake. And that's beautiful in terms of, and I know you reference EFT, emotionally focused couples therapy, in the book, and that's very much an EFT move, which is to say that we have to stop, these poor repair attempts, or this avoidance, if that's the attachment style that's there, and then to be able to say, well, we have to kind of re-engage here. And as you've already indicated, that can be really difficult for somebody who is used to running and who's used to avoiding. We'll talk about anxiety in a little bit, but just that move towards avoidance. And I think you would agree with this, that the challenge with an addiction is that it robs us of our capacity to develop grit. It robs us of our capacity to develop tenacity. because what we do is that anytime we've developed this condition that anytime we have an unhealthy emotion or negative emotion or something that's unsettling, we can run. And this is neurochemistry kind of working against us. This is, our brains are pretty efficient problem solvers, and so it's like, wow, like there's a ready-made solution right there. I don't have to feel this. Like we can go take care of it. It's just there it is.
Sure.
But that, of course, is working against us and working against our capacities to actually be able to engage in healthy relationships. So what you're encouraging here in the context of a marital or couple kind of relationship is to say, well, how do we stop that move towards the substance and then get them to re-engage, get them to start to do that take that step of courage, to re-engage back in this process. That sounds like a tall order for some folks.
Well, you spoke out the key there at the end. It's not just that addicts are running away.
Mm-hmm.
They're running to something.
Right.
They're engaging in something. One of the things that I talk about a lot is, alcohol's never going to tell you no.
Yeah, that's true.
I'll talk with addicts of all kinds, and we'll just use heroin, for instance, that those men and women know exactly how much to use to get the feeling that they want, right? There is zero vulnerability. This is what I want, this is what I need, and I go get it, right? And so you develop this synthetic attachment where it tries to do a stand-in for what we really need relationally, and instead it makes you feel better and then it leaves you empty. We call that sin. Yeah. And so for the couple working together, there's a big jump in understanding that, but also accepting that that's really what was happening. Because I've had a ton of people that will just say, well, I was just addicted. Okay, what does that mean? Because you didn't have to go to rehab. I could have zip tied you to the floor and you would have been sober.
Right.
So you're not physically addicted anymore. So it can't just be that you need the substance, because after it's out of your system, it can't be just physical. And so I know, and I'm sure that you would agree, that these attachment connections are some of the deepest needs that we have. We'll even forego our, great needs of, food, shelter, and water and all of that for that meaningful connection. And so that's the bridge that has to get crossed in order for people to start moving forward.
So once you cross that bridge, then, with chemical addictions, you still have to deal with the withdrawal symptoms.
Sure.
And so how do you navigate that over the process of somebody's recovery, and letting the spouse know that there is, of course, this withdrawal time that, like for alcohol, for example, if you're drinking a case of beer a day and you can't stop cold turkey, you can have potentially have seizures, the other side of that. So there has to be kind of a gradual decreasing. And so how do you manage the kind of the biological element of that under this paradigm?
So I'm always in favor of, medical support for detox. I'm very much in support of, after your detox, to give you a little bit of space to breathe. And that's not just for the addict, that's for the family member. Because I've had a ton of people tell me when they're in jail or they're in rehab, I sleep the best that I've slept in 10 years.
Yeah, sure.
So managing their biological stuff also gives the family members and loved ones time to breathe too, right? But once they do that, there's some long-term effects. I think methamphetamine has the longest neurological recovery time. It can be up to like 1.5 years for the brain to fully come to center. Wow. Alcohol can be up to 1 year, depending on severity and how long that you're doing it. But there's the initial sort of sobriety. There's that long-term engagement, depending on the severity of the substance, where the brain has to come back to center. Dopamine levels can find their center. But then there's also the emotional recovery that has to happen, right? So people will say, oh, well, I'm in recovery from substances, but they still haven't waited out that year for their brain to come to center, and they certainly haven't engaged in the emotional needs that they have.
Right. That's right. So recognizing that time is necessary, giving people space, because part of the reconciliation process is, giving time for forgiveness to transpire too. And that period alone, it's like, okay, am I moving forward with this? Do I trust you? can I feel like I can kind of continue to move forward? And so what encouragement could you give spouses even in that early phase where they're still not quite sure, if they can ever trust again, or they're not really sure if they can really kind of move forward or really want them to re-engage? There's a certain ambivalence that's there, rightfully so, because they've been hurt. What type of encouragement would you offer spouses in those circumstances?
One of the biggest reasons that I wrote this book was to give them a voice. They've been through an incredible amount of trauma. And we think it's, we've watched trauma, so it's secondary. Yeah, but what about you being in the middle and having to manage the kids and lie to a bunch of people? Mm-hmm. What about, you get a call from the ER, or, you start getting jumpy at things. You've experienced trauma as well. Mm-hmm. The other thing that is incredibly important for people to know is that the number one indicator of long-term recovery outside of what the addict is willing to do is family stress. Now, what that doesn't mean is if you're a little mean to them, they're going to relapse. What that does mean is that the work that you do, your own sense of boundaries and healthy direction and all of that, whether or not they come along, is the greatest indicator of them being in recovery. So for the person listening, how should you be encouraged? The more that you engage in healthy living, healthy boundaries, the better chance that they have, as long as you're willing to do it, whether they come along or not.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. All right. And so groups like al-anon, can help. Mm-hmm. And you talk about codependency in the book as well, and setting boundaries. What do you have against Coldplay? Why do you pick them?
You actually caught that. I'm very excited. Yeah. Well, it's my book, Coldplay? So I'll name the chapters whatever I want. So the specific track is Fix You.
Yeah, I know.
Right.
I'm a Coldplay fan. I got you.
But yeah, codependency is a really big deal. And I throw some, I think, rightful criticisms to the AA and al-anon model, simply because I'm sure you know about this as well, that if you take a couple and you give them individual therapy, but you don't bring them together, they're more likely to get a divorce than if you had just left them alone. And both of these ends, AA and al-anon, will both say, hey, you should engage with this. But then it's never actually done or followed up on, right? Yeah. And so they're each getting this separate interaction to where the emotional engagement that they should have with their spouse is quelled in those meetings, so they no longer feel that pull towards that engagement towards one another. As far as the codependency model, that's actually mine. The giver and taker thing is something that I had worked through and come up with over time, and that there's predictable relationships in addiction. And we can see those flip-flop in certain areas or in certain parts of life. But knowing your role, if you're the spouse of an addict, you're automatically a giver. You find connection through giving, supporting, seeing hope for the future. You can start to understand why the relationship got the way it was, as well as usually what it takes for them, for the addict to get healthy. So I try to break it down so that somebody can point at a chapter and say, oh my gosh, that's me. Let me keep reading and see what to do about it.
Yeah. So back to the al-anon and AA models. I mean, in terms of support for the individuals, it can be helpful, but I like what you're saying, which is that if they're only doing their work individually, this goes back to this attachment model, which is to say that we need them to do this work together. It's okay for them to have this individual stuff, but if they're not having their time together, and that they're only using those groups as their outlet, and it's not forcing them to engage together, then it's not going to help the relationship.
That's one of the things I'm actually mindful of when I do individual therapy is I don't let my clients leave feeling as if everything is resolved if they're married. Because if so, then I've robbed them and their spouse of the opportunity to grow.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times what I'll do in therapy, and what I think is a good criticism of AA and al-anon, is I'll give them direction and I'll give them some support and some ideas, ways that they can think about the future, but then I tell them to go do it. And I don't fix it for them. And with al-anon and AA, it's you get all of the resolution, which ends up taking away the needed stress and anxiety that a healthy relationship should have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of counterintuitive, but it's right on. It's like we think that, and people say this also in counseling. I just had a conversation with somebody that I'm a young therapist who I'm not offering supervision, kind of mentorship, kind of helping them kind of guide and understand how to bring their faith into the work appropriately. And she says that people often ask her, they're like, well, if this person comes to you, if I send them to you, are you going to be able to fix them? And this is related to other issues, not addiction specifically. But her response was like, it's not my job to fix people. You know what I mean? Like, and I think a lot of folks are surprised by that, that our job as therapists is to have firm boundaries also. Now, are there codependent therapists who think that they have to fix everybody? Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Absolutely. But that's not inherently what our job is. Our job is supposed to be, as you just articulated, to help bring some insight, to give space for them to process their trauma. Absolutely. But for this to be a safe place, and this is the attachment model, is that we can provide safety and security. Absolutely. But not for its own end. It's like we provide this safety and security so that you can then go engage in the world. And so that the basics of attachment theory is to say that there can be and there should be relationships that provide a secure base or a safe haven, and some other characteristics you talk about in the book, but particularly that secure base that we offer, that so that people can then engage. It's not just for its own sake. It's not just as creating this little safe haven, apart from the world that you only go back to, and that you don't engage. And I think that's maybe the criticism you're speaking about. Sometimes those groups can be too effective in that regard, where they become that, and they don't create opportunities anymore for real engagement in the world, and the anxiety, the stress that they're experiencing.
I think that makes them a very effective life raft, because at the beginning of recovery or in the midst of addiction, I can understand why a secular, non-experienced group would not want a screaming wife in the room. I get that, right? I totally understand that.
Right.
But if you hold on to life rafts for your entire life and you never swim to shore, don't be shocked if, you get nibbled on a fish now and again.
Right. That's right. That's right.
You've got to learn that, okay, this is great that I was able to keep my head above water, that I'm able to do this. If you don't go and engage, one, people will make AA or al-anon their pseudo addiction or pseudo relationship, but then you never get to offer your partner healing because you're so detached from them. They need to see you feel sad and depressed and regretful and mournful. They have to see that. You need to offer that to them. And if you get so embedded in these models that you feel no vulnerability or sadness with them, then you've robbed them the opportunity to be mad at you.
Hey everybody, I'm taking a quick break here from my conversation with Travis Thompson. Want to encourage you to check out my Overcoming Stress and Anxiety series. You can head on over to goodcatholic.com to purchase that course. If you're somebody who's struggling with a stress or anxiety and wants to know what it means to be able to overcome that from a Catholic integrated perspective, what does the science teach about anxiety? What does our faith teach us about ways to be able to navigate it and overcome it? Well, this is the course for you. We have lessons that are practical. We have exercises, guided meditations that we do on the course, as well as just wonderful content that's going to help you better understand the nature of your own stress, the nature of your anxiety. So head on over to goodcatholic.com, purchase Overcoming Stress and Anxiety, and use code SACASA25 to get 25% off your purchase price. Doing so also helps the channel and brings a little bit back to us here as well. So check it out, Overcoming Stress and Anxiety, goodcatholic.com, SACASA25 at checkout. Get yourself 25% off. Enjoy the course. It's been wonderful. The reviews I'm getting so far are blessed. It's just humbling to be able to see and to receive how these things help people. So I know it's going to help you. God bless you, and let's get back in this conversation with Travis. Which is then you've robbed yourself of the opportunity to have to deal with that.
Absolutely.
Because that's the way that this works is anxiety is well, I mean, it depends where we're at in terms of fight or flight, but if you're trying to avoid the disagreement, the conflict, and then you've never developed the capacity to be able to actually deal with it. And that's what you're saying, is that you have to be able to, you're going to make them upset sometimes, and you have to know how to be able to deal with that without you just running to the bottle or to the drug, to bring that about. And I think a movie that really explains this, and what was the name of the movie? It was the one with Steve Carell and Timothy Chalamet. I forget what's pronounced his last name, where his son, it was like a memoir that the dad wrote that was turned into a film. It's not about a boy. No, that's a different movie, but it was something to that effect, where the movie, the name is escaping me right now, but the movie it's a heavy movie to watch because it really kind of gets into this. And there's scenes where the son, even seeing the family kind of be happy, it triggers him, makes him feel like how much he missed being part of this.
Absolutely.
So even things when the family's trying the best that they can to provide support, and his younger brothers, everybody's kind of happy that he's around, even creating that happy state becomes this opportunity for him to feel a sense of shame. And if we haven't developed that capacity to sit with that and to then bring forth that in the context of our relationship, then the pull always to avoid is present. You were talking briefly just about your model with regards to codependency and giver and taker. Can you just spend a little bit more time talking about that? I think that's important for spouses to be able to know and to hear.
The model that I use a lot of times when we talk about codependency, it's, I can't survive without this person, which, okay, fine, I'm on board. But I started to notice some predictable patterns. And I also started to notice that people would follow these patterns throughout their life, or they would swap roles. And that told us that something significant happened. So here's the basis of it. Neither one of these are good or bad necessarily. They both have their benefits. Although when I say giver and taker, people automatically assume, oh, look at the terrible taker. The giver is so nice. It's not that simple. The taker is the person who sees hope or wants to achieve all of these great things. They feel as if that they're always running out of energy and they need someone to support them. Now, they can be very high achieving individuals, but they always seem motivated in the moment. Okay. Their downfall is that without proper healthy living, they get drained very easily. They need someone to fuel them. Okay. On the other end is the giver, and that's the person who feels fulfillment by pouring into someone or helping someone. My favorite trope of this, and this is not necessarily gendered this way on purpose, but the I can fix him. Right. If I pour into this taker, then he will be able to do all of these things. Right. Now, the giver can seem very altruistic, and I actually think a lot of well-meaning Christians slip into this, where they think that if I give, God is there with it. The problem is they don't find much identity outside of supporting and giving to other people, but they can also be hiding some of their own stuff as well. Like if I go and help this person, then my stuff doesn't seem so bad, or no one looks at it. The other thing is I don't know how to exist without giving. And so if that taker gets sober and decides not to take anymore and works on it, a lot of times the giver gets lost and they don't know why. And it's because their identity has been so centered around supporting and uplifting and encouraging and all of that. If that's their only core identity and the taker gets sober and is working on themselves, they have to work on it too, or one of two things will happen. They'll spiral out of control and feel as if they have no meaning in the world, or two, and I've seen this in severe circumstances, they will either consciously or subconsciously enforce addiction back onto the taker. This could be something as simple as saying, how are you doing today? How are you doing today? How are you doing today? And we all know that means, have you been drinking? Right. But it's even gone to the point where I had this client who was in IOP, intensive outpatient, and he pulled up to the group area in his car, and his wife pulled up next to him and handed him a fifth of vodka.
Oh my.
And we would look at that and say, oh, well, the wife is just being ridiculous or whatever. But I really think it's that she didn't know what to do, and she had no identity outside of being that giver, that she had to offer something to the taker or get the relationship back so she could have that giving role again.
And so that giving role can be its own addiction in some
Oh,
ways.
absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely. And the fascinating thing is, and I'm going to go ahead and ruin a bunch of relationships for people. The givers and takers are attracted to each other.
Right.
I have no idea why, but it's almost instinctual. You know, when I get older and I make more money, I'll donate to try to figure it out. But they're almost like instinctually attracted to one another. And it's wild.
It's I mean, and Sue Johnson talks about that in her book Hold Me Tight. You know, that the pursuer withdrawer kind of phenomenon is present, and that tends to make up the bulk of relationships. Now there are people who are pursuers, you know, and they can be high conflict individuals, or there are people who withdraw, and those are people who don't, you know, engage or don't talk, you know, but that this pursuer withdrawal tends to be kind of the norm. And so in many relationships, the challenge is for the pursuer to have to back off a little bit to give room for the withdrawer to kind of engage and step into that space.
Sure.
And that can be a challenge. But what you're saying is that you're applying that to a different circumstance or a more or extreme circumstance here with regard specifically to addictions, where the person's soul identity becomes, the giver's soul identity becomes wrapped up in the other person's dysfunction and in their capacity to be the one that's bringing the healing or to take the caregiving kind of role, and they can't, you know, let go of that. And I know that's tricky because like our faith teaches us that we're supposed to put others before us. You know, we're supposed to lay down our life for others. We're supposed to give to others. You know, charity is willing the good of another person. That's what love is. Like I'm supposed to be selfless in my own interpretation of my life. And so, yes, our faith teaches that, but there's a place where we cross a line, and then we end up making this act more about us again than actually about, you know, what's helpful for the person.
It crosses the line into idolatry. Where it's not, I'm just giving to be helpful. It's I start sacrificing these other parts of my life. I start losing my relationship with my kids for this. That's not service. That's idolatry. The other part, you mentioned charity, and I've been doing a word study on hesed, which is you know, the word for that. And in the Old Testament, charity wasn't, here you go, here's $20. Charity was, I plow most of my field and I leave the corners, and then they come and reap the corners of the field. And that's how the poor eat, right? Charity isn't just full allowance to do whatever you want to do, right? It's an engagement in what people's real needs are, but you don't just give it out for free. There has to be some engagement back. It's also a really sad state to feel like you have to give charity to your spouse, that you stood up in front of everyone and said, God, we're here and we're going to get married and we're going to love each other and all these people are going to hold us accountable. And then you find yourself at a point where you start to pity your spouse. And for that's no longer charity or giving or loving. And a lot of people will say, I'm so sick and tired of this, but they've been doing it for 10 years. You're not that sick and tired. You're getting something out of it. So you can't both have that it's charity, but I'm also suffering. Everybody else is suffering. And I also hate it. Those things just don't fit together.
Right. Yeah, I've seen these dynamics play out, as I'm sure you have in relationships at all stages. You know, it's like people, when they're getting engaged, you kind of get the sense, you can see it. It's like somebody's overgiving, they're not evenly yoked. You know, that's the word here. They're not kind of on the same page, you know, in terms of relationships. And so they feel that the relationship is identified by one overgiving to the other and the other not necessarily reciprocating that. Well, then you get you get married and you do that for so long, but then I've seen couples, you know, 7, 8, 10, 15 years into it, where it's like the marriage is sexless because it's like, well, you know, you're my mom and I'm not attracted to you because you're acting like my mom. And she's like, well, I wouldn't be acting like your mom if you didn't act like my child, you know?
Sure.
And it's like, well, but that's the dynamic that was present from the get-go, you know? And so what do you think the logical conclusion is of this? You know, that's where it goes. So how do people, if they find themselves in that giving kind of stance, or they're listening to this and they're like, okay, I'm assessing my own relationship with an addiction or not, and maybe I'm realizing I'm giving a little bit too much here. What does setting boundaries look like? What does healthy engagement then look like? What is healthy giving without losing myself look like? What's some practical kind of suggestions or parameters that we can offer people?
So being a giver Usually, we would think the taker has the most power, but the dynamic usually changes when the giver gives up on trying to make it happen. And then the taker goes, oh crap, and wants to engage again, right? So the giver actually has a lot more power for change than they might think. The other thing is, you don't need to assume that you have a ton of stuff when you're already empty. What else can I do? I don't know. You've been empty for 10 years. Let's acknowledge that first, right? Before we go into any of this stuff, what can I do? How can I support? What can be helpful? Nope. First step is to say, I've been doing this for too long and it's drained me, it's drained the kids, it's drained the family, whatever it is. Let's start from there. Before I think of the wonderful things I can do, we have to acknowledge the fact that I'm exhausted and I'm just done, right? Now, I talk in the book about what healthy boundaries are, and I give a specific example using a fence. But the idea is that healthy boundaries are made outside of the moments that we experience with addicts. It's something that we can agree upon. We can make peace with ourselves, our family and friends, and our God, that this is what is rational, reasonable, and healthy if this person doesn't follow through, right? So I'll have people that will create go bags, is what we call them, where you have a suitcase, and if they drink again, you're gone. There's no decision making. There's no argument. It's just, you've talked about it. You've already agreed to it. Somebody's already ready to give you a room and you're gone, right? We don't do ultimatums, which is you make stuff up in the moment to try to shake them awake, right? That usually involves yelling and screaming and empty threats. Right. But if you're able to create these, if this happens, then I will do this outside of those moments with addicts, you're likely to follow through, and it absolutely terrifies addicts as long as you actually mean it. If you actually mean it, that's where the change happens.
Yes. And so setting whatever those parameters are, if you do this, this is what's going to happen. If you do this, this is what's going to happen. It's almost like parenting in the sense that, when you set those disciplines, you have to set those outside of the moments that you're just angry, because when you're just angry and yelling at your kids and reacting, you're not disciplining. You're just discharging your own frustration, but you're not actually discipling them, disciplining them, forming them, shaping them. You're not consistent with that.
I'll confess a little bit of something that I've seen a lot of these dynamics in the fostering that my wife and I do, where you have these wildly attached kids that come into our home. Right. And the best thing for them is us being consistent. We have love, but I'll let a kid scream on the floor for 3 hours. If that's what it takes for them to get out what they need and learn that I'm not going to yell at them, it's quite honestly dealing with emotional teenagers.
Right.
I talk about this in the book of Arrested Development, where the addict is an emotional teenager. So you shouldn't lean over to your husband and go, all right, buddy, so these are the expectations. Okay, don't be demeaning, but in the way that you understand emotions and how far they can think, it is like having a child.
Yeah, I've heard that before, that basically emotional development stops whenever the addiction kind of takes root. And so and that typically happens in the teenage years, that it's like, all right, this is when they're not able to kind of continue to move forward.
But I will say though, and I've worked with a lot of people that, yes, that's when they definitely didn't develop, but that's the latest. They can have had issues before.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
I've had 50-year-old men throwing tantrums.
Got it.
Right. So they can have emotional regression all the way back then. It's not just that every addict is only a teenager. That just seems to be a decent waypoint of, we know you haven't made it past here.
Right. So I'm thinking, okay, this has been great, Travis, and I really appreciate your time and your expertise. I'm thinking about folks who maybe the addict himself is treatment resistant. There's significant anxiety or depression or some other mental health, that's really there. And there's just the individual themselves just feels this overwhelming sense of hopelessness, I would say. And just lack of energy to be able to do the work in that regard. Where do we start with that individual, and how does a spouse offer support, to that person?
In a Christian or faith setting, I usually just say, put your face on the ground and shut up. Start praying to God and listen to what he's telling you. Stop talking so much.
Mm-hmm.
If you've run out of energy, that's fantastic. That's where God steps into people.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So stop acting as if you have to be good enough and, oh, I'm empty, let me work my way up. No, I just wish addicts would give up already.
Mm-hmm.
Just stop. Like I'm so, it breaks my heart to watch addicts get to the bottom and realize they have nothing left and then say, you know what, I got to work harder. But that's clearly not worked for you. You have to slow down and stop and realize that this isn't it, and take a breath and get some humility in all of this, right? If you're out of energy, great. That's where God steps in. And by extension, that's a lot of times where good therapy can step in, where God speaks through people to say, you're done. I'm glad you're done, because that's where you heal. I don't have a problem when people are done. I have a problem when they're done and they pretend like they're not.
Mm-hmm.
And so for those that want to move forward, if you're looking from a faith context, I am very adamant with my clients. Plant your face on the ground, not metaphorically, like literally do it. Outside of that setting, it's learning to sit back and sitting with your emotions and understanding what's even happening, because addicts don't even know what's going on and what the pain is, and learning that not just tolerance, but that engagement with what is happening in your head, but what is also happening with other people, because you shouldn't be treated with little kid gloves. We should be respectful of your emotional development and where you are, but we're not going to treat you perpetually like a 14-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to learn that the balance for each individual addict of what's the healthy amount of discomfort for you to continue to grow without spiraling, but is also level enough to where you feel like you can come to center without becoming complacent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's the behavioral side of this. And so we've been talking so much about the attachment side, kind of the emotional kind of processing, the depth work that needs to happen in an individual to be able to do that. But there is also, of course, this behavioral kind of component as well. So say, okay, well, what's the minimum? Where are you right now? What's the next step? What can you actually do? Where can you, what we have to find what that is. And even if you have no energy, we have to be able to take steps forward, because being stuck where you are right now is not helpful.
Yeah, it's, I'll work with clients and they'll come in, they'll say, I'm exhausted, I have no emotions. Great, that's an emotion. You can say empty. There's no opting out of it.
Yeah.
It's not about fixing it, it's simply recognizing it.
Right.
And that's what it is. It's not about what can I do to fix it. It's what's happening right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes people don't even notice that things are triggers or things are concerns, when in reality, their quote unquote trigger started a week ago in a sense of shame or regret that built over time. So the awareness is definitely the beginning of all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Travis, what drew you to this work? I mean, of all the different types of therapies that you could be offering, what drew you to this work specifically in this population?
Part of it came from my own story. I experienced addiction myself, and that was 16, 17 years old. I call myself a sprinter, so I didn't build it over 5-10 years. I went for it, and that has to do with my family role. But that was where I learned it for myself. I learned that there was a bunch of mental health stuff that we didn't even know. I also always had this knack for being able to read people and their situation and what was going on. I realized I could do that early on, and then I started making people uncomfortable. So I just stopped telling people I could do it. Like I freaked out one of my teachers that I had for a couple of years. We never spoke about our family life. And I said, "You're the youngest of 3, aren't you? And you have 2 older brothers?" And she like went white. So I've always had like a level of discernment in that. I got to grad school because I wanted to do therapy. I liked psychology, and I learned that I could not just work with coping skills all day. Right. I needed like the heavy engagement. That's where I felt a calling to. Well, I spent some time in my internship at an IOP doing rehab stuff and fell in love, and I got all of the cases of addiction or substance use within my grad program. Everybody kept referring them to me. And so from there on out, I just really enjoyed the whole process of it, getting in the mud and the dirt of it. And so for me, it's not like I find my value in it, but it's energizing and engaging. And I don't have boring sessions because of that.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. Well, that's great that you've been able to take your story and the gifts that God has given to you and be able to help others, with it, and then to be able to find that particular calling. Yeah, kind of similarly, I would say that in terms of marriage counseling specifically, I went to in my program, being a general kind of counseling program, I was one of the few that actually wanted to work with couples. And there are a lot of people that are like, "Why do you want to work with couples?" Like that's like that's just not. I want to stay as far away from that as possible. And it can be not again. It tends to be emotional and charged, but it's good work, when you help people kind of navigate these very important and intimate relationships. And so I commend you for that. Well,
just come over to my side and add addiction on top of it. Just make it even more exciting.
I've never been drawn to it. I remember I took my substance abuse class and I went to AA meetings, as part of it. I just know. I don't know. I was like, this isn't where the Lord was calling me. And I've been, you can't help everybody. You can't solve every problem. You have to kind of know what your lane is. And so I've worked with, like I said, couples, and then sex addiction has been the area that I've worked with a lot over the years as well. As you stated, the process is the same, may not lead to the same legal troubles, or it's the lethality of it. Obviously, is the change, that the biggest issue that's there too. So, anyways, just know, kind of, everybody's got to know where their lane is. Like you said, I think you before we started, you shared some of your tattoos with me, and the one of the harvest. The laborers are few, and the Lord is calling us all to find our little plot, in the vineyard that He's asking us to till, and if we can all kind of find that, then praise Him, for it, and we support one another with the spaces that we have. So, as we're kind of bringing this conversation to a close here, there's one story I'd love for you to share to the audience. You talk about it in the book near the end, but you had at one of your facilities that you worked at, you had this kind of bizarre or unique practice of giving your clients a mustard seed. What was that all about? And explain to people why did you do that?
Well, anywhere I've worked, my bosses have just come to assume that if something weird is happening and I'm involved, just leave it alone. It's for good reason. But I had read the parable of the mustard seed, and in the facility, it was not a Christian facility. So of course I didn't expound it all. But what I would do on a Monday is I would give all of these clients a very small mustard seed. And I would say, all right, I don't care how you do it. I don't care where you keep it, but it has to be with you at all times, obviously, unless you're like in the shower or something. Right. If I see you on campus, I am going to stop you and ask you if you have it. Here's the contingency. If you lose it, look for it. If you can't find it, come back to me. I'll give you another one. All you got to do is ask. And so I would have these grown men carrying around these little mustard seeds. And I always had this big fear that all of a sudden a mustard plant would start growing out, and then I have to speak with HR and everything. Never happened.
Get the Roundup ready. Start spraying it.
But what I started finding out is these men would take these mustard seeds and they ended up putting them where they put their drug of choice, like in the little coin pocket or the cellophane inside of a cigarette box. And I would have them do all of this. And at the very end of the week, they would say, all right, so what gives? Because this is ridiculous and the seed is insanely small. And eventually some of them were like, it's supposed to represent positivity or all that. And I said, absolutely not. Absolutely not. That's not it. But what I gave to them was, this is your hope for the future. This is your hope for recovery. I need enough to fill this seed for you to have hope for the future. And so I asked them, where did you keep it? And they started realizing, oh, I was keeping my hope for the future where I was keeping my heroin. That's a problem. Yeah, buddy. That is a problem, right? Yeah. And they came to me, and a few of them had the insight to say, wait, why do you have so many seeds? I said, well, these have been built over time, and I didn't make the seeds. I can't claim anything for them, but I can give them out. And, for the Christian clients, they made the connection. For the secular ones, they said, man, I got to go buy me some mustard seeds. But that was the idea, is you need enough to just fill that. And when people were mindful of it that whole time, it helped them orient their thinking and their recovery.
Yeah. And recognizing also that the that optimism and purely positive thinking is not the same thing as hope.
Mm-mm.
And the research is very clear with that. Well, Travis, I've greatly appreciated the time. If people are interested in getting the book, how can they do so?
So you can find me on my website, TravisThompsonCounseling.com. I have quick links on my link tree. It's Travis Thompson Media. But you can find all of it there. The book's on Amazon, on my website. I have other media appearances and articles I've written as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, Travis, final question to ask all my first-time guests. What gives you hope?
What gives me hope is that God is still good. Because I have 2 Corinthians 12:9 written on me, that God tells Paul, my grace is sufficient for you. And so no matter what happens, my own mental health struggles, addiction, working with whatever it is, I know that God is still good and he's got me. And so I'm going to keep writing. I'm going to keep going on podcasts until I die. And that's what gives me hope.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. Well, keep doing the great work you're doing of serving the people of God in the various locations and ways that you do, and many blessings on the book and in its outreach to others as well. So thank you so much for giving me some time this morning. All right, folks. Well, there it is. This is what happens when you get two therapists talking about attachment and addiction and just all this other great stuff. I mean, it's tough, and stuff, honestly, that Travis and I, we could have kept talking about for another hour or so. So check out his book. If you're somebody who knows somebody who's married to an addict, if you yourself are married to an addict, or just want to kind of better understand the relationship and how to be able to kind of overcome those tendencies that he spoke about, particularly to giver one. I thought that aspect of the episode was really challenging, in terms of what is it that we're getting, even if we're married to an addict. What is it? What's the positive that's working for us? How do we let go of those things? How do we genuinely set those boundaries so we don't get just those codependent needs met? So challenging. It's challenging stuff for us to be able to reflect. How do we genuinely help people? And that's always a difficult question, because sometimes when it comes to addictions, it's not so clear cut what it means to actually be helpful. So if you find yourself in a situation like this, thank you for listening to this episode. And I strongly, strongly, strongly encourage you to find a good therapist to work with. Head on over to Catholic Psychotherapy Association and find a therapist somewhere in your area who can help you be able to overcome and navigate the challenges of being married to an addict. You're not alone. There are many great resources available to you. Find support groups, reach out to your church. You're not alone. I reiterate that. There's a lot of great resources available. And so we just want to be able to point you in the right direction to them. So if you have enjoyed this episode, please, I want to hear about it. Leave a rating, write a review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, or leave a comment on Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. I love to be able to hear from our listeners and to know how these episodes are helping you in your life, how they're helping you grow, how they're helping you better understand your own emotional, spiritual, and relationship health. And so that's what we do this show for. So many blessings to you. Thank you guys for being with me. I'm grateful for every single one of my listeners. I pray for you all. And so have yourselves a wonderful, wonderful day. God bless you and be good.